So we get to the Magpies, who, like quite a few teams in recent history, couldn't back up their premiership with a finals appearance last year, so they'll be looking to make amends. In today's video, we're going to take a look back at Collingwood's best 22 statistically from 2024 to see where they excelled and where they could still improve. We can also add the players acquired in the off-season to determine what sort of changes we can expect to see and if that'd be enough to get them back to contending in a top 4 position. My name's Woody and this is Wooden Spoon Data with the 18th best AFL content on YouTube, and in today's video we're joined by SwoopLuke, one of the biggest names in the Collingwood YouTube and media scene. How are you doing today, Swoop?
Good, mate. I'm very, very excited to be on here. I've got a peek of the numbers and the math that go into it before we start talking, and the work you put in is just second to none, dude. It is absolutely incredible. We've been talking for a while, and I've always wanted to sort of work with you. And I dropped math in at the start of year 10. Whenever I could drop it, I dropped it because I had a calculator. So this is going to be interesting. This is going to be very interesting. I'm very bloody excited.
Thank you, mate, and I'm very grateful to have you here as well. Before we dive into it, I'd like to take a moment to thank everybody that's watched this off-season. We've recently hit 1K subs, and it absolutely blows my mind, but it wouldn't be Wooden Spoon Data without some stats. So in the last month, we've had less than 10% of total watch time by subscribers, and just under half of our watch time was from returning viewers. So if you have enjoyed yourself and you want to watch more videos, it'd help us out a ton if you hit subscribe. YouTube also seems to actually care about how many of you get notified. So if you want to go that step further, hit the bell. And I guess as an early announcement for those of you that didn't skip, essentially we're doing live streams over the season. It'll be Friday for Footy Watch Along, so it'll notify you for that too. But look, if that's not your style, even just giving this video a like would be awesome. Finally, for the regular viewers, Collingwood will be the final solo team reviewed before looking at the top 8 from last year as a group. To do this, I've made a simple spreadsheet to compare Collingwood's players against the average player in the same position. We can also compare each player against the top 4 player in the same position over the last 5 years. I have taken some liberties to include best 22 players in the 2024 and 2025 lineups who missed large chunks of the season through injury, but I've tried to have minor influence. So basically I've taken every stat and every position and then compared stats between an average player in a given position and a top 4 player from the last 5 years in the same position to determine what stats are important for each position. For example, Scott Pendlebury had 35 out of 42 important stats above an average midfielder last year, but that drops to 19 out of 42. We were to raise that average to a top 4 midfielder over the last 5 years. The average mid had 2.45 intercept possessions per match last year. Pendlebury had 2.9 and therefore was more than the average 2024 midfielder. But if we compare him to a top 4 midfielder over the last 5 years, where the average has been 2.92, he is lower than a top 4 mid. Make sense? Good. So we did that for every position and every stat we deemed important for each position. Finally, once we determine the best 22 Collingwood could field from last year and this coming, we can compare the players selected as a whole against the average production from a top 4 side over the last few years. So let's start with defence. Collingwood's key defenders in 2024 were Darcy Moore with 23 matches, Jeremy Howe with 19, Billy Frampton played 18 and Charlie Dean only played 8. With a total of 68 matches played across all their key defenders, we can divide by 23 games and determine the Pies average and prefer 2.96 key position defenders per match. The Magpies did not add a key defender with AFL experience to their list this offseason, but they did draft Joel Cochran with pick 47 in the national draft. For now, I don't expect to see him in the lineup over existing options, but what's your thoughts here, Swoop?
Yeah, look, he might debut later on in the season if we sort of need him. But yeah, I'd keep him off that at the moment. Yeah, that's no problem.
Looking at above average numbers, there were 2 clear leaders in Moore and Howe, so we'll have them in both years' lineups. But do we look at a third tall role? I've said it in other videos, but when structuring a team, I mostly consider the preferred average for that role. In this case, we will go with 3 key defenders, but who do we choose? First off, I have seen some suggestions that McGuinness might be looking to move to defence. Is that correct, Swoop?
That's correct. That's pretty much a like a certainty. Like I feel that McGuinness has gone past Frampton and Charlie Dean in training. Trained with the Collingwood A side yesterday in match sim. But again, you're not going to have defense status for a guy that was mainly forward for the last 5-6 years.
Exactly right. I am interested to see what he can do in the role, but his numbers from this past year just don't look better than existing options in Premiership full forward Billy Frampton or injury maligned key defender Charlie Dean. So when considering the final defensive numbers at the end, keep in mind that if McGuinness is playing over one of the players selected, it would be because he has better overall results. Therefore, the overall defensive numbers we give in a little bit should almost be considered as the floor of the back six's output if everyone is healthy. So, who should be selected? I've already mentioned some of the main things I consider when selecting a side, the average for that role, the output of the back six against the top 4 back six, but one of the other things that I consider, and perhaps most importantly, is how those selections affect the rest of the team's output and needs at the end of everything. Well, we will have a different back six players between years, but to explain why, I'll need to talk about a few medium defenders, particularly Quaynor and former Giant Harry Perryman. But before we go over that, let's go over some of Dean's numbers first. In 2024, while Dean's regular and top 4 above average numbers are slightly better than Frampton, improving the back six's numbers against the top 4 back six by +5, he would reduce the sum of the important stats at the end of everything by -1. So that's why we will be taking Frampton into 2024. But I mentioned Quaynor and Perryman earlier, so why was that? Well, with the addition of Perryman, we have to look at who he comes in for. I have heard that he came to Collingwood for more midfield time. First off, have you seen much of that, Swoop?
I don't know how much this is going to mess with the algorithm, but Harry Perryman hasn't trained with the defenders at all. So he's through and through a midfielder who has been training with the defenders for pretty much all preseason, besides his injury when he was doing rehab, is Josh Dacos. So Josh Dacos, expect him to start off the half back line alongside Houston and Isaac Quaynor. Dacos will probably most likely jump onto a wing where he won his best and fairest and All-Australian selection. But at the moment, he's solely training with the backs and Perryman is solely training with the mids.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't mind that idea, but I might have to go on a tangent within a tangent here to explain why I think Josh should stay in the mid. So stay with me here, and I promise we'll make it back to finish the key backs. Josh might well be better playing the half-back flank role. We would have him as a 23 out of 37 defensively versus 22 out of 42 as a mid. He is only a +1 when compared to Perryman's defensive top 4 numbers, and he actually would end up being a -1 for the sum of the back six. Also, if Perryman took Josh's spot in the mids, he would be a -10 when compared to Josh's top 4 mid numbers and would be a -8 for the sum of the starting mids. Also, as a side note, before we get back to defense, I really like Josh in the guards. He had the equal second highest center clearance per CBA at Collingwood with 21.85%, only behind Finlay Macrae. And for all players that attended the same percentage of centre bounces or more, he was 4th. Still behind Macrae, I might add. So that's why I'd keep Josh in the mids and Perryman in the defence for this exercise. Mostly because things are already improving defensively with the addition of Houston, and I don't want worse numbers for the mids. Also, both of their stats come from the roles they're in.
Exactly right. And Harry Perryman, for the most part at the Giants, he was playing off that half back line. So he was only doing stints in the middle when they had all those injuries. So that probably, messes with the data a little bit as well. But I know that he wanted to leave to get sole midfield minutes. So, but like I said, Craig McRae loves playing players that can play in 2 or 3 different positions. So don't be surprised if Perryman does go off to the half back line. Even Houston might, jump into the middle at one stage. Who sort of knows?
Yeah, exactly. Also, I will admit, swapping them wouldn't change the final sum at the end, which is a bit of a flaw in my system and something I'm addressing in the next version. So, some of you might have figured it out by now, but when comparing Perryman and Quaynor had lower above average numbers by -11, lower top 4 above average numbers by -5, and if he held his starting spot in 2025, he would reduce the sum of the starting back 6 by -3. So Perryman gets the starting role in 2025, and we'll come back to Quaynor when we go over the rest of the medium defenders in a second. Now, finally getting back to the key backs, we know Frampton and Quaynor made the 2024 side and Perryman replaces Quaynor's starting role in 2025. But does Frampton get replaced this year too? Well, because of the increase in many of Perryman's stats, Dean is no longer a -1 in the sum of important stats. Now he would actually be a +2 in the sum of important stats at the end and a +6 in the sum of important stats above a top 4 back 6. So for that reason, Dean will make the side in 2025. So now that I've finally explained why we've got different full backs between years, let's look at the chart for our most important key defensive stats. As is customary, let's start with the positives. At least one of Howe or more are ahead of target in every stat or near enough. And if we look at just Frampton and Dean, we see Dean is ahead in many stats, but not all, such as 1%ers and spoils. So Swoop, is this what you would have expected to see from the numbers?
Charlie Dean would be used mainly as a third intercept defender, so not necessarily a lockdown. Like as you're probably aware, Collingwood have sort of really gone away from lockdown defenders, and I guess the league sort of has as well. But Billy Frampton is just your sort of natural, man-on-man sort of defender, whereas Charlie Dean, you could see him as a replacement for Jeremy Howe. And I think that says a lot about all our other sort of defenders. So Reef McInnes will do the same. Cochran, when he comes in, will do the same. So our really only key lockdown defender is Billy Frampton, because, look, Moore will play on Curnow and stuff like that, but that's not Moore's. We know, everyone, you ask any Collingwood supporter, we know Moore isn't a one-on-one defender. He is a second, third intercept defender coming in. So yeah, Frampton is that one-on-one, and that's why Charlie Dean's output on disposals and intercepts are a lot higher.
Fair enough, that does make sense. Remember, he'd also have to be better than McInnes now, as if McInnes is playing over Dean, it would be because he has better results. So let's look at the remaining medium defenders between years, look at some charts, and wrap up the defensive unit as a whole. Last year, Braden Maynard, Isaac Quaynor, and John Noble played 20 or more matches, with Oleg Markov playing 12, Will Taylor 5, and Tujiath just got the 1. With a total of 84 matches played across all their medium defenders last year, dividing by 23 games, we can determine the Pies average and prefer 3.65 medium defenders per match. Collingwood did not add a medium defender via the draft, but they did pick up Dan Houston and Harry Perryman this offseason. You're obviously all aware of Perryman's inclusion, so let's set the remaining medium defenders between years. There was 2 standouts for this role last year in Maynard and Noble, with Quaynor leading the next brigade fairly comfortably. But should we only go with 3 medium defenders or add 1 more? Well, despite the average leaning towards 4 players, I'm going to break from tradition and only go with 3. So, why is that? I've broken down what I consider most with roles. As I said, I think generally the most important result is the overall team result at the end. When looking to add a 4th medium defender, I couldn't find a way to exclude players elsewhere in the field and increase the overall result. So for that reason, I will only go with 3 for both years. With that in mind, clearly Houston is coming into the 2025 side, but with only Noble departing, this leaves no room to include Isaac Quaynor in the 2025 lineup. As when compared to any other medium defenders or midfielder, he would reduce the sum of important stats at the end of everything by at least -2. I do think he's probably the next man up, so if I had one, I'd probably give him the 23rd role. But Swoop, what's your thoughts on that decision? Do you think he is close to the edge of selection or not?
I don't think he's on the edge of selection, but I do think that the stats are sort of right in the way that in 2024 he did really lower his colours, and that I don't know if the stats won't really reflect it too much, but with the loss of Nathan Murphy as well, the defenders were trying to cover Murphy as well as their own job. And with the injuries and stuff that we sort of had, Isaac Quaynor, he lost what he had in 2023, which was his speed. So he wasn't running and gunning off half back. He was trying to be more of that lockdown defender, and he was getting beaten quite a lot. So he's one of the guys that need to improve. But I wouldn't say he's on the cliff of the team. He's probably one of the first pick, but he needs a lot of improvement to get back to his 2023 form, where he made the extended All-Australian squad.
So let's look at the medium defenders chart before the defensive group as a whole. Starting with the positives, in the 2024 lineup, Maynard is ahead of target in rebound 50s, intercept possessions, handball receives, tackles, score launches, 1%ers, and pressure racks. The departing two from the 2024 side were also both ahead of target for tackles and pressure racks, so let's see if those strengths are maintained with the new addition and see the differences between years. If we look at the 2024 lineup, we can see only rebound 50s, handball receives, 1%ers, pressure racks, and spoils were ahead of target. Whereas if we look at the projected numbers from this group, it suggests that not only will all those strengths remain above target, but now disposals per turnover, intercept possessions, tackles, score involvements, and score launches all join them. For me, this suggests Collingwood will look to start more of their scoring chains from the defensive half, which was down last year. So, Luke, is that something you've noticed, and is it something you've seen worked on at all?
Yeah, no, definitely. You hit the nail on the head. Last year, we just couldn't get our running game going like we had in 2022, like we had in 2023, and we just couldn't get that run out of halfback. You know, when you become the hunted, other teams try and work you out, try and put the stop on. So adding Dan Houston into this team and then chucking Josh Dacos onto a half-back line, that's two elite ball users that you've got coming out, and then you have their running capacity. And that's something that I've noticed in training these last few months, is that they're sort of doing that chaotic run out of halfback again. So I dare say you will be seeing the disposals from turnover up, and just running out of defense and scoring from defensive 50 will be up. Because last year, I don't know if you have the data for it, but last year our scores were generated from forward 50 chains as opposed to defensive 50 chains compared to 2023.
Bang on. In 2024, Collingwood averaged the fourth lowest score from the defensive half at only 29.4 points per match. This was a dramatic drop in form, as in 2023, they were the best club for points generated from the defensive half at 39.7 per match. So, in 2024, the sum of the Magpies' defensive output only had 12 out of 37 important defensive stats above that of a top 4 defense. With the changes they've made in the offseason and the lineup we've chosen today, we'd expect to see that improve to 26 out of 37 important defensive stats above a top 4 defense. That rockets past Freo's forward line improvements from our last video and now makes the Magpies defense the most improved individual section of the ground from any team we've reviewed this offseason. Overall, I think this gets back to 2023 form or potentially even better, but let's see if the mids look to be improving too. Last year, Nick Dacos, Josh Dacos, Jack Crisp, Steele Sidebottom, and Scott Pendlebury all played 20 matches or more, with Jordan De Goey playing 13, Lachlan Sullivan playing 10, Jack Vitale and Ned Long managed 7, and Tom Mitchell played 6, with Ed Allen only getting 2. The Pies added young wingman Will Hayes to their mid-stocks with pick 56 in the national draft, but did not add a player with AFL experience to their list. Do you think Will could be looking at an early debut, Lou?
Yeah, I think Will Hayes will. He's been, out of the 3 draftees, he's probably been the one that's shown the most in just these last couple of months. But where he's shown it is as a forward pocket, half forward, not really with the mids. He'll push up a little bit, but he's been working really well in tandem with Bobby Hill. So if he does get a debut, it will be in the pocket. And you got to think that with no Joe Richards, no Jack Ginnivan, Harvey Harrison is still mending from his ACL injury. We don't have a out and out forward pocket if Bobby Hill or Jamie Elliott sort of goes down. So Will Hayes will be that next step up.
Okay, well that is good to hear. Hopefully he isn't needed, but it is good to have some extra depth in the small forwards. With a total of 156 matches played across all the midfielders last year, dividing by 23, we can determine Collingwood average and prefer 6.78 midfielders per match. When looking at basic numbers, there was a clear top 2 last year in Nick Dacos and Scott Pendlebury, but the numbers are closer when looking at top 4 averages, where Josh Dacos, Crisp, De Goey and Mitchell are the clear next best options. So we'll have Mitchell on the bench for the best starting midfield numbers, but we now again get to the question of, do we go with 6 or 7 midfielders? And again, I'll break from tradition and only go with 6 midfielders. This is also for the same reason, in that I just couldn't find a way to include Sidebottom or Allen over other options further up the field. So that's the mids lineup with no changes between years. So let's look at the players individually before as a group. So if we look at the players individually, we can see that everyone is ahead of target for handballs received, and the majority of players are ahead of target for hitouts gathered, centre clearances, and pressure acts. Before we move on to the overall output, some of you might have noticed Nick Dacos's numbers. He actually averaged the equal highest hitouts gathered with Patrick Cripps at 3.5 per match. He also averaged the equal second highest centre clearances behind Cripps. He was 4th for average total clearances and was 5th in average shots from a midfielder. Before we move on, is there anything that jumps out to you, Swoop?
Look, the only thing that sort of really pops out to me is how we've got Nick above average for pressure acts, because that's one of the biggest knocks that opposition supporters give him. So to see that in the data, it shows what Collingwood supporters can see, that he does pressure, he does tackle, and he's not just a 1-2 handball receive guy that they all sort of knock him about. So that's really good that the data reflects that.
Yeah, good point. While I'm at it, I may as well add that he also averaged the most contested possessions of any Collingwood player last year at 13.87 per match.
Blocking out the haters.
So let's move on to the total output from the mids. And as a whole, I'm pretty happy with what I see. The only stat behind target is ground ball gets, and that's by less than 1 per match. Everything else is where you'd want it to be. Though in 2024, Collingwood's kick to handball ratio was 0.5% behind the AFL average. And with higher than average handball receives and the lowest average total marks, it suggests that maybe Collingwood should look for the switch play more often to slow down movement and generally just control the play. This could also help reduce the average clangers per match, of which Collingwood was equal worse with Richmond, averaging 61.7 per match. So what's your thoughts, Luke? Do you think I'm asking you to play too much like my side St Kilda by looking to play the switch more often, or does that thought have merit?
So I guess starting with the clangers, that clanger stat, which is surprising when you sort of hear it, but then you sort of watch our matches, and especially last year, we're sort of known for our chaotic football, but it's like controlled chaos, so we kind of know where we're going. Last year, whenever we were sort of getting the ball, because our personnel were sort of falling down, because everyone was sort of down on form, when we did have that ball, we lost that controlled chaos, and it just became chaos. So that's when you're bombing it in. That's when you're turning it over a lot. So I'm really not surprised that we are literally the equal worst team for those clangers last season. So you could even see it on the field. What I'm noticing at training a little bit more is they do have that controlled chaos, but then all of a sudden the coach blows his whistle or whatever the sort of call is, and then they go back into hitting those diagonal kicks, switching it up. Not a lot. They're not using the switch too much, like opposite wings, but when they need to control it, they're controlling it a lot better in training than they were during games last season.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad my thoughts have some merit. So, in 2024, the sum of Collingwood's midfield output had 24 out of 42 important midfield stats above that of a top 4 midfield. And considering there's no major changes here, it seems unlikely to change drastically. While the Pies have many things to like about their midfield, they also have a few things to improve upon. Collingwood were first for shots per inside 50, but they were only 12th for inside 50s. And that could be fixed by simply getting some better usage going forward or more opportunities in general, but the mids get their first opportunity from the ruckman, so let's discuss the ruck role and see if they're doing enough. Last year, Darcy Cameron and Mason Cox were the only ruckmen played. The Pies did not pick up a ruckman via the draft, nor did they trade for one with AFL experience, though they do have backups in Ilro Smith and Oscar Steen waiting in the wings for their first match. So, Swoop, do you think either of them might be getting a shot this year?
Maybe Smith. I'm loving what he's doing, but he's still so young. He's still so raw, 19 or so. They are trialing those guys as forwards as well. So hitting him really deep, kind of like what Mason Cox does, where he's forward more. I know we see Darcy Cameron a little bit, but Darcy Cameron, they tend to use him down back a lot more. So if Darcy Cameron's to rest, he's resting in the back line where he's getting those intercept marks, as opposed to Mason Cox, who's trying to kick 2 or 3 goals or 1 to 3 goals a game when he's in the forward line. So that's what they're trying to do with Smith and Steen. But yeah, Darcy Cameron would have to go down for one of those guys to debut, you would think.
Yeah, kind of what I thought you'd say. So let's just hope they're not needed. With a total of 39 matches played last year, dividing by 23, we can see Collingwood averages and prefers 1.7 rucks per match. Cameron was the standout ruck, and I don't think I need to do a ton of explaining why. But with such a high average, do we go for an extra ruck in the 2024 and 2025 lineups or not? Well, to do that, we'll need to have a quick chat about the forwards and Mason's role in general. In 2024 and most of his career, Cox played as a second ruck, meaning he spent large chunks of his time inside 50 as an additional key forward. And last year, Collingwood struggled to keep key forwards on the park, with none of them managing over 11 matches. This brought their average down to 1.47 key position forwards per match. They also picked up Tim Membrey this offseason too. So all of that is to say, if Cox comes into the lineup, his role also needs to be considered against the key forwards. So before I get to that, let's quickly look at Darcy Cameron's ruck charts so the lineup decisions make sense. Starting with the positives, solo against the top 4 ruckmen, Cameron is ahead of target for everything but 1%ers, spoils and score involvements ever so slightly, but as a general, that's fine. Though when you compare him to a top 4 ruck group, that's the main ruck and whoever takes over for him when they rest, he is behind target in everything but total marks. So with those numbers in mind, it is fairly easy to see why Cox makes the side, particularly in 2024. But he does spend large chunks of his time as a key forward, so if he is to remain in the side this coming year, that will be at the expense of one of the players I mentioned earlier. So let's come back to this when we discuss the key forwards in a moment and have a quick look at Cox's ruck charts. And funnily enough, total marks was the only stat where Cameron was more than a top 4 ruck group, and it's the only stat in Mason's chart where he's above target against a top 4 ruck by themselves. So overall, personally, I think this is one of the main areas the Pies could still work on. And some of that is player output, but I also think it's structure. Cameron certainly works best with a second ruck to give him a chop out and sit behind the play, but Cox only averages 67% time on ground, and much of that is as a key forward where others might play that role a bit better. So for me, this suggests someone like Dan McStay needs to start taking more ruck contests. What's your thoughts on that, Swoop?
Yeah, so you've literally just read my mind. So what's happening at training at the moment is Darcy Cameron is taking main rucks like the numbers show, and they are working Dan McStay in the ruck as well as Billy Frampton as well. So I think what they're going to start doing is, look, I guess we'll get into the teams a little bit later, but I don't have Mason Cox starting in my best 23. So I've got Darcy Cameron doing most of the ruck work, and I've got like a Hawkins type forward line where McStay will be doing the ruck in the forward line and leaving Darcy Cameron on a wing, and just sort of letting McStay float around doing that. Even if he doesn't touch the ball, he's competing, he's a big body, he did the rucking. You've got to remember back into that, was it the prelim or it might have been the semi against Richmond where their ruckman, was it McInerney went down and then McStay had to ruck for the whole entire game and just absolutely smashed it. So he does have that pedigree, and I think that's what they're going to start doing, especially if they want to play Tim Membrey in that forward line.
Yeah, perfect. My thoughts exactly. So let's look at the key forwards to confirm if Cox makes my 2025 side or not. Collingwood's key forwards in 2024 were Brodie Myercheck with 11 matches, Reef McGuinness with 9, Nathan Kruger with 6, Dan McStay with 5, and Ash Johnson just the 3. With a total of 34 matches played, dividing by 23, we can see the Pies average 1.48 key forwards per match. Collingwood added Charlie West in the national draft with pick 50 and picked up former Saint Tim Membrey as a delisted free agent. Before we get to Membrey, could you see West getting some game time this year, Swoop?
I talked about Will Hayes and how Will Hayes has been the most exciting, but Charlie West looks like he's only 18 or something, but his body, he looks like a man already. Like he's ready to go. Like we haven't drafted a key forward in what feels like forever. We're always drafting inside mids or mids this or mids that. And to pick up Cochran and Charlie West as 2 keys, it's going to be incredible. I'd love to see Charlie get a go, especially Myercheck's at the end of this sort of line as well. Mason Cox, Membrey. So I'd love to see him get a go. We'll need a chunk of VFL games, but by the looks of training, he's just marking everything. He's very confident in his body, very confident against the senior defenders. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does sort of debut if we need that extra tool.
Interesting. Well, I might keep an eye out for him later in the year in the fantasy leagues. Otherwise, clearly Collingwood didn't play many key forwards last year, but this was via injury rather than design, so I am yet again going to break from tradition and at least pick 2 key forwards. I think fairly clearly both Myercheck and McStay make it, but does Membrey make the side? Well, because Cameron's overall output was slightly behind the team ruck targets in a few stats, if we were to swap Membrey with Cox, it would result in a -2 in the sum of overall stats, reducing hitouts and hitouts to advantage below a top 4 team. So Cox will stay in my lineup, making the bench. But could Membrey make it in place of some of the other mid-medium forwards? Interestingly, Membrey could take Bobby Hill's role, being a +3 for the sum of the forward 6 against a top 4 forward 6. Membrey was a positive for kicking efficiency, contested marks, total marks, and he improved marks on lead enough to get a .2. He would also have similar results with Lachie Schultz, being a +2 in the forward 6 and a +1 in the sum at the end of everything. Otherwise, there were no other mid-medium forwards Membrey could take over from, so I might be getting a bit ahead of myself here, but I will be giving him Lachie Schultz's role from the 2024 side, as he had better average goals, goal assists, contested marks, marks on lead, marks inside 50, and inside 50s. So let's look at the key forwards charts. Here we can see Myercheck and McStay were only both ahead of target for inside 50s, and the introduction of Membrey looks to shore up a few of the marking problems mentioned earlier. All in all, these are pretty good numbers, but let's have a look back at the mid-medium forwards before looking at the overall output. The mid and medium forwards last year were Pat Lipinski, Bobby Hill, Will Hoskin-Elliott, Lachie Schultz, Beau McCreary, Jamie Elliott, Harvey Harrison, Joe Richards, and Finlay Macrae, who all played 9 matches or more. Collingwood didn't draft any mid-medium forwards besides already discussed Will Hayes, but there's Harry Di Mattia waiting in the wings from last year. He was injured last year. Is he back into full training now, Swoop? And could you see him getting some game time this year?
Yeah, so he's back into he was back into full training and then copped a concussion last week, so he's been out for the last week. Di Mattia's a bit of a weird one because he can play as that sort of high half forward role. What they're doing at the moment at training is they're training Finn Macrae as a high half forward. So think of it more as like the Taylor Adams role of 2023, whereas that hybrid of high half forward and jumping into the midfield when we sort of need him. With Di Mattia, he's been solely training with the mids this preseason. So he really wants a wing spot. So he wants Steele's wing spot. And he just needs to get a little bit quicker, but he does have the tank to sort of play that game. But he hasn't really been training with the forwards at all. But he was drafted as that sort of wing forward hybrid.
Well, hopefully he can get some more continuity and start forcing his way into the side. With a total of 148 matches played, dividing by 23, we can see the Pies average and prefer 6.43 mid-medium forwards. We will be picking 6 for 2024, but with the exclusion of Schultz, only 5 will carry over into this year. There was a standout 3 in that role being Lipinski, Bobby Hill, and Hoskin-Elliott, but things get much closer when looking at top 4 averages, where Schultz, McCreary, Jamie Elliott, and even Harvey Harrison start getting similar numbers before things drop off with Richards and Macrae. Games played would suggest Macrae, Richards, and Harrison would miss out, and I'll be doing the same. To be clear, McCreary and Hyphen will be on the bench in both years, giving the starting roles to Lipinski, Bobby Hill, Jamie Elliott, and as mentioned earlier, Schultz starts in 2024, but not 2025. So that's the 2024 and 2025 mid-medium forwards lineups. Before we look at overalls and the conclusion, let's look at the mid-medium forwards chart. Here we see shots, score involvements, and pressure acts are all fairly strong. And for mid-medium forwards, Lipinski was the 7th best for ground ball gets, and McCreary was the 4th best for tackles. Where I worry is pressure acts and tackles inside 50, where if we move to overalls, here we can see that all the marking stats go up, but those 2 stats are sacrificed as a result. To me, this suggests to make this swap effective, Bobby Hill, Hoskin Elliott, and Membrey all need to lift their games defensively. But what's your thoughts here, Swoop?
Look, I think the only thing would be the Lockie Schultz. So with Schultz, because he does come on as that, and I know you sort of made your reasoning with everyone else that has to lift their stuff up, but Schultz coming on as that attacking defender with Bo. In my lineup, I know Patrick Pisky's played a really good game. Will Hoskin Elliott, I'd have one of those starting as the sub, and keeping Schultz on the field just to get those pressure acts up, because Will Hoskin Elliott isn't going to do that much like of that sort of pressure act because he's more of a box-to-box midfielder. Bobby Hill does do it a little bit, but not as much. Jamie Elliott doesn't really do it as well. So you need those two, especially if you're going for that three-pronged tools. And last year as well, you were saying, McStay played 5 or 6 games and Myercheck played 11 or whatever it was. We never played a game with McStay and Myercheck in the same forward line or in the same team at all last season because of the ACL injury, because of Myercheck's injuries as well. So that's just another reason why it's so tantalising to have him, McStay, Myercheck, and Membrey, the 3 M's, up in the forward line at the same time with those crummers around their feet.
Yeah, I think it'll be an exciting trio. And you do have a point. Schultz does provide good pressure, so maybe the only way is to have McStay start to attend more ruck contests so that Cox misses out entirely. In 2024, the sum of Collingwood's forward line output had 18 out of 51 important forward stats above that of a top 4 forward line. With this lineup for 2025, the projected sum of the Pies forward line output would see a modest increase to 20 out of 51 important stats above that of a top 4 forward line. So let's show the final numbers for each line as we reflect upon what we've learned. The Pies starting back 6 projects to have one of the biggest improvements from any individual area we've reviewed so far. And I think this gets back to 2023 form or potentially even better. In 2024, Collingwood averaged the 4th lowest score from the defensive half at only 29.4 points per match. This was a dramatic drop in form, as in 2023, they were the best club for points generated from the defensive half at 39.7 per match. But overall, the change in Collingwood scoring between years didn't majoritively come from points for, where they only saw a rough 6.5 point reduction in 2024. It came from points against, where the Pies let in just over 11 more points per match last year. So if the Pies can get that 10 plus point production from 2023 to return to their defensive half, while hopefully just getting better defensively via the introduction of Houston, Perryman, and maybe even McGuinness, they start to look ominous. The mids and ruck department are generally set, but I would hope to see McStay take over from Cox's second ruck role, and it seems like that might be the case. Collingwood's scores from stoppage was above the AFL average last year at 34.9 points per match, but their inside 50s were 0.1 behind the AFL average. They managed to stay competitive because they were number 1 for shots per inside 50 and likewise for scoring shots. For me, this comes back to looking for the switch in traffic to reduce the clangers per match. This hopefully increases inside 50s, and should those shots per maintain, this again looks ominous. Forward of the ball, Membrey looks to shore up many of the marking stats, but it does appear as though Luke is right, and if you were to do it for one of the small forwards, it might upset pressure numbers. So this just reinforces the idea of giving McStay the second ruck role. In total, we use 70 player stats against a top 4 player in the same role to determine the effectiveness of the 6 different player types we use. We also use player cumulative averages to see if they surpass the expected outcome of a top 4 defense, midfield, ruck line, and forward line to see if the group might work well together or not. Technically, we can look at all of those 70 important stats across all lines and see how the whole team fares against an average top 4 side. In 2024, the sum of Collingwood's output had 30 out of 70, or roughly 43% of important stats above a top 4 side. With this lineup for 2025, the projected sum of the Pies' output would see them jump to 33 out of 70, or roughly 47% of important stats above a top 4 side. So generally, I think Collingwood are on the up. The additions in the off-season look to have shored up every line, and barring injury, I can't really see how this gets worse. I'll do a prediction video very soon, but Wheelo Ratings has Collingwood with a 44.5% chance of making the finals and a 20.2% chance of making the top 4. So What's your thought on those numbers, Swoop?
I don't rate Bulldogs that highly at 44% for top four. And I think Hawthorn might be a bit of a blip in the pan as well. Like, I know they're exciting and stuff, but that's just because they were just riding that sort of wave. Look, I know why they probably have us like that, and why a lot of commentators have us falling out of or staying out of the 8 because of we're old and stuff like that. But it works for our lineup, and at the end of the day, this is just this is based on numerous sort of things that can change in a blink of an eye. Like, how many times, like, we in 2017 we finished 17 and then we jump up into a grand final the next season. So look, it still hurts seeing us that they've predicted us as 10th when I've got us predicted as top 4. So and to even see I love Adelaide, I love the people from Adelaide, but to see them at 9 and us at 10 kind of is a bit of a kick to the teeth, to be honest, because I don't know how they're improving.
I do think Adelaide has a pretty good forward line, but I also think you've been somewhat hard done by here. But thank you for watching our assessment of the Pies 2025 list and what some of their changes between the years might have brought. Thank you as well, Swoop, for joining us. His stuff will be down the bottom if you don't know him. Go and give him a follow. My name's Woody. This is Wooden Spoon Data. And if you like this video and you want to see more data-focused AFL content, click the subscribe button. The notification bell will let you know when a new video pops up. YouTube also suggests some videos up on the side here that you might be interested in. So if you want to, go have a look. Thanks again. Cheers.